A lot of people have made the comparisons between Drew Brees and Bo Nix, but Broncos head coach Sean Payton outlined some similarities for them, including how they process the day-to-day. We'll break that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's up? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much for making Locked On Broncos exactly what it is. And just a reminder, you can get this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast every single day, all year long. So subscribe or follow so you never miss out on your favorite Broncos coverage that you get here every single day, every step of the way. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, cover the team in person in Dove Valley on the day-to-day, joined alongside by Sayre Bedinger. He's been the site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com, for a handful of years covering this team, and he brings that over there, predominantly.orange.com, every single day. Check out his written work here. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sayre, my friend, look, Broncos OTAs officially wrapped up. We are on the brink of mandatory minicamp coming up next week. There's going to be a lot of storylines, which we'll talk about beginning really on Monday's episode, but really kind of some aftermath after 3 weeks of OTAs, our thoughts on some of the trending things that we're seeing. But more importantly, we're going to analyze Lucas Krull continuing to climb the ranks of the Broncos offense at the tight end position. Josh Reynolds becoming a consistent option for every quarterback that throws to him. And we're going to kick things off by breaking down Sean Payton's comments when asked about comparing Bo Nix and Drew Brees. And I think this is a hot topic, because I think in the pre-draft process, Sayre, you and I were doing a multitude of shows, different mock draft Mondays, talking about Bo Nix, talking about some of the comments and comparisons that scouts and media members have made regarding Bo Nix and obviously Drew Brees. And I think when you watch the two games of those two guys, like, there's certain things that they do from a positional standpoint that you're like, okay, like at the college level, Bo was doing that. You see what Drew Brees did. Like, Drew Brees was impeccable in terms of things like accuracy and just being consistent, being surgical in a sense. We've seen a little bit of both of that. But when Sean was asked to comment after OTA practice last week, the one thing I thought of was like, Sean doesn't like being asked this question. He gave a little bit of insight, but he didn't give us really a full, like, I'm going to compare these two specifically.
Yeah, and I think that was due to the way the question was worded, honestly, because I don't know who it was out there at practice, Cody. Maybe you heard the question asked and you know who it was, but somebody asked, like, how would you compare Bo Nix to a young Drew Brees? And that qualifier right there allows Sean Payton to give a thoughtful answer as opposed to like, hey, can you compare the Broncos first round rookie to a Hall of Fame quarterback? So really well done, whoever asked the question and allowed Sean Payton to give a thoughtful answer, because he said, like, their personalities are different, but we're looking for similarities, right? So he said mentally, Bo Nix, he wants to know as much as he can, as fast as he can. Said he's the son of a coach, and that Drew Brees wasn't necessarily the son of a coach, but like this group of quarterbacks in general, he kind of compared them. Remember, he compared them to orphan dogs a couple weeks ago. This week, they're gym rats, right? And so he's like, they enjoy the process, and there's the maturity that he said you can compare Bo to Drew Brees. He said Bo Nix played 61 games, and when the Saints got Drew Brees, it was coming off his rookie contract and coming off an injury. So there's the maturity factor, but like as throwers of the football, I think this was the biggest aspect of the comparison that we got, Cody. And if Broncos fans want to be excited about anything, of course, we know off the field it matters a lot. When we're talking about the on-field product, what he compared Bo Nix to a young Drew Brees, I mean, he said it's locating the ball and accuracy. And I think that right there, I mean, I'm not saying everybody go buy your Bo Nix jersey now, but like, look, that's a huge compliment for a coach to give at this stage of the offseason when asked to compare a player to, we know Drew Brees is going to be in the Hall of Fame very soon. Like, that is substantial. So I think it was a big deal what he said there, even though he could have easily just been like, you know what, let's pump the brakes a little bit here. We're talking about Drew Brees and a first round rookie. I mean, he gave a thoughtful answer and added some context here that I think should be really exciting for all of Broncos country.
Well, I think the maturity aspect is definitely huge. And just being out there at practice and watching Bo, I mean, Sayre, the thing that I can't quite visualize or like put into words for Broncos country to fully grasp it is just, it looks like Bo has been doing this for quite some time, right? And I think when you see him come out and you see him run the team drill, like for the first 2 weeks, the practices we were able to attend, he just looked comfortable. He looked like he's been doing this for a long time. And the thing that I'm seeing for him, he's at the line of scrimmage pre-snap, whether it's 7-on-7, whether it's team, he's sitting there and he's going through and he's reading, and then he's giving out an audible. Like he sees something, he'll audible, he'll check, he'll give a hard count. And then they might check because, for example, this is just my thought process going here. He's looking at the defense. They do something. He checks. He sees if they move something. And if they do, he checks back to the first play. Like, he's smart. And then he knows exactly where he's going. So the moment that he does that, and he's got like a computer brain from the sense of it and how comfortable he looks doing, even though he knows, I know pressure's coming off of this side or this side, I already know where I'm going with the football because this is going to be there. Like, that is the processing part that we've seen. And that's something that Sean has acknowledged, that he's a good processor. I mean, obviously the accuracy traits, that's obviously something that stands out. I wonder if we'll ever see, right? Because remember that one game that Drew Brees had against the Indianapolis Colts, probably got, I don't know, a handful of years ago. He went like, what was it? 29 of 30 passing. It broke an NFL record, 91% completion percentage. Bo has the capability of being surgical in that manner. Like, he obviously had one of the most efficient passer completion percentages in all of college football last season. Granted, the NFL level is a little bit different, and we're not expecting Bo to come in and throw 95%, in one game, or even like 76. Like, I think that there's a very good chance that we'll see a Bo Nix completion percentage this year, like of a game, like in a single game, of 76% or more. He's just smart and methodical, and he looks comfortable. And I think that's something that the Broncos haven't had, because I've been there when, you had guys like Case Keenum. Case Keenum that didn't necessarily have that trait from what I saw when I was watching him in practice. You looked at Drew Lock at certain times. It was like Drew didn't have that comfortability factor that I've seen so far with Bo. And look, that could be a good sign early on. We still have to wait for the pads to come on. We still have to wait for other things to happen. But I would say the Bo Nix start here is getting off to a really good head here for Sean Payton. And obviously this offense, as they look to move into training camp, mandatory mini camp, and then obviously the preseason. We're going to see these guys play football here in about a month and a half there. So I'm excited about it. Broncos country should be excited about it. We'll see if Bo Nix can maybe do some more things in the regular season if he is the starting quarterback. That, hey, maybe we do see something that we saw out of Drew Brees in a little bit of Bo Nix. But with that said, Broncos country, there is one player who's had a lot of success, whether that's coming from Bo Nix, whether it's from Jarrett Stidham. Josh Reynolds has become a reliable option for almost any quarterback throwing him the football. Could he be one of several players that can help lead a breakthrough resurgence for the Broncos offense in 2024? We'll break that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, whether that's big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. And one of the things I want to tell you about BetterHelp and why I utilize them in the past is we don't always have the answers. Life does not come with a manual or a playbook that tells us what we should do when we're dealing with this unexpected event that comes up, like depression, anxiety, stress. In my industry that I work in, and I'm sure some of you feel this way as well, like imposter syndrome, feeling like you don't belong. Those were some of the things I felt and I needed help with. So I utilized that by connecting with a therapist at BetterHelp. I filled out a brief survey. It connected me with a therapist. I vibed really well with her, so I stayed with her. But if you don't vibe well with a therapist you get matched to, you can switch at any time at no additional charge. So take advantage of that here today, because therapy can be different for everyone. And most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team. And it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on.
If the Denver Broncos want to break through offensively in 2024, they're going to need one of their most underrated free agent signings of the offseason, wide receiver Josh Reynolds. Cody and I are going to tell you exactly why he could be key to this team's offensive breakthrough in 2024. But want to say thank you and give a shout out to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And for all you everydayers out there, you know that you can find Locked On Broncos free and available everywhere that you get your podcasts, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And by the way, you may want to check out the first ever 24/7 sports streaming channel called Locked On Sports Today. It's on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV app in the Fire TV Channels app, and you can get personalized coverage. I mean, you don't want this national coverage that's not focusing on the teams that you want. You want the top stories of the teams that you care about, and you can get that 24/7 with Locked On Sports Today. So go ahead and find it for free on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV Channels app. Cody, let's break down this addition of Josh Reynolds, because it wasn't one that necessarily, I don't know, nobody, again, we talk about national media, not really talking about the Broncos. I mean, the ESPN's not breaking in and saying, hey, Adam Schefter with the latest, Josh Reynolds to the Denver Broncos. I mean, what does this mean for the scope of the league? It's not that type of a move, but it's an underrated move that could help propel this offense going forward. I think there's a lot more than meets the eye here, but what have you seen out there on the practice field so far that should have Broncos country encouraged by this deal?
Well, so far through the two practices I've been able to see, look, the Broncos pulled a little switcheroo on us this past week. So I wasn't too happy about it because I planned my whole vacation around like, hey, I'm going to be gone Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, be back just in time for Thursday's practice. The Broncos say, hold up, playa. We're going to practice on Tuesday, the moment I'm on the road. So I was bummed out. I didn't get to attend this week's practice. That was obviously a little bit disappointing. But from what I've seen from Josh Reynolds and even the accounts, because like I said, I'm really good friends with a lot of people on the Broncos beat, a lot of other media outlets out there. We all get along, contrary to people wanting all of us media members to beef with one another. But what I consistently have seen is Josh is comfortable, I think, with Bo. He's comfortable with Jarrett Stidham. Didn't get to see really anything like from my vantage point in terms of him with Zach Wilson, who got the opportunity to run with the ones the other day. But for me, like Josh he's smart. I think he's already picked up the playbook, because part of it too, coming over, a lot of that Detroit offense has a lot of similarities to what the Broncos, what Sean Payton wants to run offensively. And so he was able to thrive in that. And look, I think when you look at Josh's background in his context, like 6'3", 194, he's got a really good vertical. He goes up and catches passes. He is a guy, in my opinion, Sayre. I know we're all waiting for Courtland Sutton to return, and that's obviously a storyline that we're going to get to next week as mandatory minicamp approaches. But the thing with Josh Reynolds that stands out to me, he's great at locating the football, whether it's a little bit higher than obviously where he's at in terms of his height stature. He's very good in terms of getting length when there's a ball thrown in front of him. And I've even seen him body adjust to where, hey, there's been a pass or two that's gone a little bit, he's running, let's say, across the field. It's thrown a little bit behind him. Good calls in terms of body adjusting to be able to make that play. He's smart and he's a veteran presence. Now, is he going to be the team's number one wide receiver? I don't think that's going to be the case. But, I think you look at his situation with the Detroit Lions, and obviously you had other guys emerging there. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown getting the bag this offseason, being their top playmaker. And then you look at Jameson Williams coming into the mix a little bit. Josh thrived in a role where he really wasn't the focal feature guy. But I think when you take away the options like Sam Laporta, you take away the options like Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you're really emphasizing covering them, what did we see him do? He thrived. I mean, he had 40 catches, Sayre, on 64 total targets last season, 608 yards on 40 catches. He averaged 15.2 yards per reception, and he had 5 touchdowns on the year last year. So when they needed a little bit of a spark, when let's say Amon-Ra or their other options were taken away, he's proven to be a reliable playmaker. That right here, when I look at the Broncos wide receiver room, I think it fits in very, very well for him to come in and thrive in kind of a similar role. And hey, maybe he will have a larger volume of targets or catches than 64 total targets or 40 catches on the year in Denver. So much health contingent. But I think when you factor in a perfect world, Sayre, a healthy Tim Patrick, a healthy Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and a Josh Reynolds, I like Josh Reynolds winning some of those matchups against some of the defensive backs he'll be going against this upcoming season. And if the Broncos can find a way to get him in the ball, when those options are taken away in terms of the other guys, I think Josh Reynolds will be a big-time playmaker here for the Broncos offense this upcoming season in terms of talking about potential, right? Got to get there, but I think he has all the potential to be just that.
He's one of those guys that you can rely on week in and week out, I feel like. And it's not always going to be like you said. He doesn't need a giant target share in order to be able to do that. Like you said, I mean, the Lions had Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, XYZ. I mean, they're getting the ball to Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. So there's a lot of other guys there that had priority over him. But I want to take a quick trip down memory lane, because when the Lions and Rams made the trade that involved Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, like Goff, he just got another, a big bag this offseason, right? We saw him get a contract extension from the Detroit Lions, a huge, huge deal from them. Remember early on in his time there, probably the first year and a half or so, things weren't very good. I mean, people were like calling Jared Goff a bust as a former first overall pick. Like Sean McVay was right to move on from him and get Matthew Stafford and all these different things. There was a point at which, I can't remember if it was during Goff's first or second year with the Detroit Lions, but Josh Reynolds was his teammate with the Rams for a long period of time. Then Josh went and signed with the Tennessee Titans. Things didn't work out there. They waived him in the middle of the season. The Detroit Lions picked up Josh Reynolds in the middle of a season. I can't remember if it was 2021. It doesn't matter. It was a year in which Jared Goff was really struggling. And after the point, I actually wrote an article about this because the numbers were so staggering. Jared Goff, before and after the acquisition of Josh Reynolds, was astronomically different. He was better in every aspect of his game after they picked up Josh Reynolds. And I'm not trying to overhype Josh Reynolds, and you never know when people are going to comment and say, oh, we were just talking up Josh Reynolds, this, that, and I'm trying to get people. No, you can go look at it for yourself. Go look at the numbers difference when Josh got there and before he was there. It's kind of crazy when you have a player that quarterbacks are so comfortable with, because look, this guy was 15th in the NFL last year in yards before the catch. Every time he was targeted, 15th in the NFL. So he's getting open downfield. 10.9 yards before the catch per reception, 12th best QB rating, 113.3 last season among all wide receivers with 50 or more targets. Like, this guy is up there in terms of efficiency per target. And so what does that equal? It equals trust from your quarterback. And for a rookie quarterback to be able to lean on a guy like this in the passing game, massive, massive, massive contract for the Denver Broncos to reel in.
When you look at his average depth of target as well, 2022, 11.9 yards downfield, 10.1 last season. I think when you look at the overall volume of like how effective was he as a pass catcher, well, we mentioned, let's go to 2022 here. He had 38 total catches on 59 targets. Well, of his 38 catches that he did have, he moved the chains for a first down on 25 of those receptions. Like, that's huge. Like, what do we talk about so much about Denver's offense needing to find sustainability to keep drives alive? Like, Denver was one of the worst third down offenses in all the NFL last year. It was frustrating to watch. But then you look at him last year. Of his 40 catches that he had for the Lions, 32 of his catches last season moved the chains for a first down. Sayre, I mean, when you talk about projection, you talk about on paper fit, this is a guy who's in a prime position. If he stays healthy, and if Denver's offensive weapons also stay healthy around him, he can thrive, and he can give the Broncos many options to continue to sustain, to find a way to sustain for what would be like the first time in forever for this team. And regardless of who's at the quarterback position, you need guys who are reliable. You talked about the passer rating when obviously targeted. I think overall, Josh Reynolds, you look at his career body of work, I think the lowest quarterback rating he's ever had when being targeted consistently, I think was 72.4. That was back in 2019. Since then, it went to 85.3, 90.2, 88.4, 95 passer rating 3 years ago, 99.5 2 years ago, and last year, as you mentioned, 113.3. This is a guy who's consistently thriving in the role that he's being placed in. Even if he's not the feature number one, he's thriving in a way that you need your role players to do, and Denver hasn't had that in quite some time. So I'm excited to see if Josh Reynolds can continue to climb the ladder here for the Broncos offense. And speaking of climbing the ladder, Lucas Krull continues to put himself in a position to be featured prominently as the main tight end option for the Broncos offense in 2024. We're going to talk about why he can be a guy who can emerge to help the Broncos lead a resurgence on the offensive side of the ball here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. So if you're in Dallas, if you're in Boston for any of the NBA Finals games and you want to have a chance to go see the action, get some tickets closer to kickoff where you're going to get some of the better deals possible out there with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Not only NBA tickets, but any event that's going on near you, whether that's comedy, concert, or theater. I just bought the girlfriend and I tickets to the Zach Bryan concert that's coming up in Denver next week. Game Time was a place that gave me the best deal possible. And on top of that, the one thing I like about the Game Time app, I wanted to see what the vantage point was going to be like in the seat in the section that we're going to be sitting in for the concert. And they give you that option inside with seat views where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we're highlighting Lucas Krull as he continues to climb the ladder inside of the Broncos offense, picking up Sean Payton's offense to a detailed level and finding himself in a position where he is right now the team's number one tight end option. How can he lead a resurgence? We'll break that down here. Just wanted to say thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos country. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much. Make sure you subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day. Your best objective Broncos news, analysis, coverage, and more. You get that here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So with that said, Sayre, let's talk about Lucas Krull. Has had a really good OTAs from what I've been able to observe. Really, I think our hype on Lucas Krull kind of began a little bit toward the end of last season. Now, obviously, you and I have been discussing some things, even like last year before he was even featured, saying, hey, like, keep an eye on this guy. And I even made the bold offseason take, I think it was after the Super Bowl, where I said, hey, keep an eye, like, don't be surprised if Lucas Krull is the team's number one tight end, or is there like their breakout player in terms of being a premier option as a receiving threat. And now we're starting to see some of these things align a little bit. And part of that's due to injury, but I think most of it, like 95% of it, is due to the work that Lucas Krull has put in, like staying in shape and being an athletic playmaker, being able to track the football downfield, being efficient in the short to intermediate passing game. And now it's just like, all right, hey, once we get to training camp, that tight end competition is going to be a little bit more fun to watch, considering that, hey, Lucas Krull could very well be a guy who becomes Sean Payton's next breakout player. And interesting enough to say, like last preseason, Lucas Krull, if I'm not mistaken, led the NFL in terms of receptions and receiving yards from a tight end during last year's preseason cycle as a member of the New Orleans Saints. So something's got to give here.
Yeah, and I learned something interesting that I didn't know. I was reading a piece from Chris Thomason, kind of did an in-depth look at Lucas Krull and interviewed him and chatted with him a little bit. I didn't realize that, I didn't even think about it, that he and Adam Troutman were actually teammates in 2022 with the New Orleans Saints. So those guys have chemistry with each other, and I guess that does help. And they worked with each other before, and they know how to play off of each other, which is kind of nice. But look, when Sean Payton is getting this excited about a guy, I mean, you can't really not talk about it, right? And he was asked again at week 3 of OTAs, like, what is it that you see in Lucas Krull out there on the practice field? Because he said, like, he's talking to Lucas Krull, right? And he's saying, hey, people, by the end of this year, they're going to know who number 85 is, right? Well, what is it that he's seeing out there? He said the same things we see in Dulcich relative to, we see a certain stature we like, so that means we have a bigger target. He said he has good vertical speed. He's young, so we think there's room to grow. And that was one of the reasons they signed him, right? And Sean Payton said that. And so he said these camps, they benefit certain players. And it's a little bit more than others because you get to see certain things that you want to see when in the passing game out there at OTAs, as opposed to guys who, when the pads come on, they really benefit from that. So I think that with the Broncos offense desperately needing a weapon in the passing game at the tight end position all of last season. I mean, when Krull came in for that first game, we saw him screaming down the sideline against the Buffalo Bills wide open. We're like, this is it. This is what we've been missing this whole time. Somebody that can win vertically, somebody that can win after the catch. You saw him make the impact in the Patriots game late in the season. And look, I think this is a guy who is really underrated in terms of, I know you've been hyping him up since, like you said, after the Super Bowl. We were really interested by the fact the Broncos brought him in after trading Albert Okwuegbunam last year. But now things have been given like this violent shove into the serious category of like, hey, Lucas Krull, by the way, I mean, you might even want to like draft him for your fantasy team or something like that. You don't want to overhype guys at this stage of the offseason, right? But at the same time, the writing's kind of on the wall.
Yeah, and it seems like Sean is putting him in a position where, hey, like if he is the number one tight end option, he is going to have a very extensive role. And look, I think so much of it too with what we see from Lucas, what we have seen, what I've seen from him in practice is he's going to be a guy that can get you across the middle of the field, right? On crossing patterns. He can get you vertically, as Sean had mentioned, his vertical speed. I mean, Sayre, I don't think people really realize, because when you see it on TV, everyone's big, everyone's tall, but in person, Lucas Krull, he's 6'6". Okay, and he can run a 4.5 40-yard dash. He can get downfield. He's got a good stride about him. And the thing I like about him, he stayed healthy. Like, he's fast for his size, but he has stayed healthy. I think he's got a perfect balance of, weight, but also athletic ability combined there. It's hard in today's NFL to find guys like that consistently thrive, right? Because sometimes you might get a guy who's got a really great body type, but isn't fast enough, right? And sometimes that doesn't necessarily, translate negatively. I think Jonnu Smith is a guy who's not necessarily like a breakaway speed guy, but he's got an athletic body type, and obviously had a lot of success as a member of the Tennessee Titans and, with Arthur Smith. But you look at Denver. Denver hasn't had a productive tight end in how many years, Sarah? I mean, really, I think when we can go back and look at it, Noah Fant was a guy that was up and down, not necessarily all of his fault. But I think the last time the Broncos had a really good, legitimate receiving tight end option, it was Owen Daniels. When was that? Probably. That was back in the Super Bowl. That was a Super Bowl. And look, he wasn't big. He wasn't big or fast like a guy like Lucas Krull, but he was that steady combination of reliable, and obviously the 2 touchdowns in the AFC Championship game really helped out in that regard. He really got the Broncos Super Bowl, off to a good start, a catch across the middle field in the first, and really kind of take the pressure. It was one of the, not the best offense in terms of what Denver had against one of the best defenses in the NFL, led by Luke Kuechly and those guys. But what did he do? He found Owen Daniels. Owen Daniels was a guy who was a chain mover. He was a drive sustainer. Like, Denver doesn't need Lucas to be that. I think Lucas actually has the traits where he can be a big-time playmaker, where he can haul in a lot of touchdown catches this upcoming season or big explosive plays downfield. We saw a tiny bit of that last year. I think it was a 37-yard catch against the Los Angeles Chargers in that one of those final games of the season that before, obviously, Denver kind of sprouted out. For me, I just think that the expectation here for Lucas Krull, stay healthy. He and Adam Troutman, I think right now, that's the best contingency plan here for Sean Payton, because we talked about all offseason, like, is Denver going to draft a tight end? They didn't decide to do that. They stayed kind of firm there. We found out that Dulcich's injury that's kept him out of OTAs has been he had foot surgery on the foot injury that popped up a little bit toward the end of last season. So right now, we're not really kind of counting on Greg Dulcich, and if he stays healthy and then can come into the mix, that's great. But it seems that Sean is really intent at this point in time. Lucas Krull, Adam Troutman at that tight end position, which those guys stayed healthy last year. Can they continue that trend? Obviously, if they can, I think they're comfortable with the position that they're in at tight end.
And it gives you options with guys that can create after the catch, which is something that, no offense to Adam Troutman, we see him get the ball in the open field, and you kind of hope, like, can anything happen after the catch here, right? I mean, and he's a way better athlete than I'll ever be, but when we're talking about game changers at this position, I think at tight end right now in the NFL, that's what the best guys are the best at, is creating in space. I mean, you talk about mismatches in the passing game all the time, and Sean Payton classifies those players as the joker in his offense. But just think about Sam Laporta last year as a rookie. I mean, he had more yards as a rookie than anybody in the Denver Broncos organization has had over a 2-year span in the last handful of years, which is kind of crazy to think about. But why was that so? Why did that happen? Why did it work so well for him? He created after the catch, and he has ball dominance. When the ball is in the air and thrown his direction, he's able to go pluck that ball and be athletic at the catch point. that's what the best tight ends are best at in today's NFL. Unfortunately, we just haven't really seen that in Denver, because most of the guys that the Broncos have had are the guys that, hey, they're wide open in the flat, or they're kind of just like wide open dragging across the middle. Even Noah Fant, that wasn't his strength. His strength was not ball dominance at the catch point. And that hurts when you're as fast and athletic as he is in open field. So to me, that's where Lucas Krull sets himself apart, is he's got that ball dominance trait. He's very physical at the catch point, and he can snatch the ball, but he can also create after the catch. Like, he's a crafty runner, and a lot of big guys aren't able to do those sorts of things. They either have to be good in a straight line, or they have to be able to bowl people over. I think he can do both of those things, but I also think he's kind of crafty in terms of his agility in space, which gives him a massive edge in terms of being able to create for this passing game.
The benefit that he also has, besides his physical and athletic traits, is the fact that he's young and he's unknown. Like, there's not much of a scouting report out there that other NFL teams have saying, like, hey, when we're looking at the Broncos offense, like, all right, we really got to watch out for this guy. Like, he's got the ability to become that type of player. We just haven't seen it yet. And I think that's what has me the most excited about seeing Lucas potentially getting a bigger role, being more featured inside of Denver's offense this upcoming season. In Broncos country, we want to hear from you. What were your thoughts on Sean Payton's comments about Drew Brees and Bo Nix? What are your thoughts on Josh Reynolds becoming a reliable option for the quarterback position? And of course, your thoughts on Lucas Krull and the potential role he can have this season for Denver's offense if he becomes the feature guy. Make sure you let us know wherever you're watching the podcast or listening to the podcast. You can get us for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. But with that said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here. Broncos country, for all you everydayers out there, we're going to talk about We're going to talk about three players on the defensive side of the ball in tomorrow's episode that could help lead a defensive resurgence, and really starting things off with one of Denver's key offseason acquisitions that came via trade in the NFL draft. We'll break that down and much more in tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.